Hi, TFALers. Joe here. For this bonus episode, we listened to a story called About Tita by Lauren Lola, a fan of the podcast. If you're interested in submitting your own stories to air on TFAL, please contact us at thisfilipinoamericanlife@gmail.com. Thanks.
About Tita. When I was 12, I received a brass bracelet at my completion of elementary school. It had belonged to my late great-aunt Tita, or Tita as my dad called her. On the brink of entering junior high school, it was the first time I had ever heard her name. Unknowingly, it ignited the beginning of learning about this relative that, before then, I not only had never known about, but would eventually discover that we have a fair amount in common. Tita was born in 1915 in the Albay province of the Philippines, the second of 6 children. She received her bachelor's degree in mathematics within 2 years of entering university, which was very unusual for a woman in the Philippines in the 1930s. But given who Tita was as a person, it wasn't too surprising. She was a unique individual in many ways, especially for that era. For instance, she was the first woman in my family to go to college. While she intended to move forward in education, not only as a student, but also as a teacher, it wasn't long before World War II broke out and Japan took control of the Philippines. While her father and other relatives were held in concentration camps, Tita worked during the day as an elementary school teacher, with a soldier of the Japanese army keeping guard, might I add, and at night as part of the Philippine resistance. She would pass along food, news, and other necessities to her family as frequently as she could, and always with a careful eye. If she had been discovered to be with the resistance, she would have been executed along with the rest of her family. Immediately following the end of the war, she applied for as many scholarships as possible. Her quest for education took her many places. She studied all over the world, with Spain and the United States as just 2 of the countries she visited. It was through the University of Indiana and the University of Illinois that she obtained PhDs in mathematics and physics. As a teacher at Collyer University, Tita saw passion in her occupation and shared that passion as she conducted class lectures. She never had children of her own, so she saw her students as her kids. These students would go on to write to her even after they had graduated. Her devotion and contributions to the university were significant enough to where she became the first recipient of the university's Presidential Award in 1972. Tita was an adamant traveler, and it was because of her travels that she gained education beyond the classroom setting. One trip included an experience with racism in the United States South in the 1950s, when a police officer caught her drinking from a water fountain that was labeled colored. There were no legal consequences, but she was greatly surprised and disturbed about the use of such labels. The locals were labeling her as white, for they had never seen a Filipino before. Tita was also a passionate piano player, and a gifted one too. During monsoons, if my dad's family was visiting, she would tickle the ivories in a way as if the control of the weather resided in her hands. Also, once while on a trip to New York, she would play on the piano in the lobby of the Algonquin Hotel every evening, and she would draw crowds every time. She had a particular fondness for playing Giuseppe Verdi's Requiem. An individual by the name of Charles Munch, who turned out to be the conductor of the Boston Symphony, even tried talking her into playing for the symphony as a guest artist, only for Tita to turn down the offer, stating that piano playing was just a hobby. Tita was a role model for my dad. He always looked up to her and admired her for her wisdom and outlook on life. It was with that admiration that during her final trip to the United States in the summer of 1992, he willingly introduced her to my 6-month-old self. Twice during that visit did she hail me as a real Lola, and that I had the hand of an artist. I have no memory of our meeting, and despite being only an infant at the time, I really wish I could remember. It was our only meeting, for Tita died 6 months later. Within the years since first learning about her, I have tried to find out new details about her. I have asked my dad questions and gone through Tita's letters, and over time I've noticed some uncanny commonalities we share. Tita stood at the same height as me. She walked long distances without getting tired and was an adamant reader, just like me. She had a fear of heights, but loved flying in airplanes. She was an admirer of the Dalai Lama. She kept a journal, and she liked eating crab and halo-halo, just like me. She was very fond of orchids, and in my adulthood, I've grown quite fond of them myself. More recently, much like how she was active in the Philippine resistance during World War II. In the current political climate, I'm finding my fate in becoming a resistance fighter myself. One can argue the nature versus nurture theory in this case, but perhaps identity traits can transcend beyond time and generations. My dad has done so much in terms of passing along Tita's ideologies and philosophies to my brothers and me, and yet somehow I feel like I've gone even beyond that. Perhaps Tita and I are linked, even beyond metaphysical implications. A few years ago, I contacted the president of Collyer University to see if I could obtain any documents regarding or belonging to Tita. The president responded back, telling me how she remembered hearing about my great aunt when she was a child, and said she would help. In a way, it felt like a birth search, but an unsuccessful one at that. I never did get the help that I was looking for. I believe that the more I learn about Tita and the traits I've inherited from her, the task in carrying out her legacy doesn't seem as daunting. It feels more like learning to live the life that I want to live. As a real Lola, as she called me. Despite our brief encounter, she still remains to be an encouraging presence.
This Filipino American Life is produced by Michael Nailat. Our intro and outro music is by Roger Habon, aka 10.4 Raj. Resident reality checker Girly Colado, legal advisor Rianne Fajardo, and graphic design by Vincent Collyer.